Good days, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue discuss about different approach of psychological theory. Unit 2, Psychodynamic Perspective. So in this unit, you'll be learn to how to describe the developments of psychodynamic theories in heuristical contexts, identifying various type of psychoanalytics theory in psychology, identify various type of attachment theories in psychology, explain the differences between psychoanalysis and attachment theory, examines the approach of psychoanalysis and attachment theory, explains the main concepts in psychodynamic perspective and apply them to current trends and issues. So, in psychoanalysis, the most famous psychologist is Sigmund Freud. He is also known as the father of psychoanalysis. He was once the pioneer in this field. In psychoanalysis, he reported the techniques of hypnosis with free association. This technique is discussed in detail about the on the psychoanalytics approach. A few years later, Freud actually published a significant work, The Interpretations of Dream. In this book, he argued for the significance of psychoanalysis in psychiatry. He also established the psycho Psychology Wednesday Society, which was later renamed the Venice Psychological Society. This society mainly discussed the psychoanalysis and the well-known case, which is a Little Horn case. Let us watch the video here.
So today's video might seem a little bit strange, but most things concerning Freud have a certain strangeness about them, especially in today's time. This is the case study of Little Hans. The name Little Hans is a pseudonym for Herbert Graf, who was the son of a Viennese music critic named Max Graf. Max Graf was a family friend of Freud and a follower of his theories. Little Hans was born in 1903 in Vienna and unusually was not treated directly by Freud, but rather by his father, who would correspond with Freud through a series of letters detailing his son's behavior and quoting their conversations. Only on one occasion did Freud hold a session with the boy in person. Little Hans had been affected by a traumatic event which had occurred when he was 4 years old, in which he had witnessed an accident. A horse carrying a heavily loaded cart collapsed in the street. After the event, the boy's parents noticed that he had begun to develop a fear of horses, particularly those carrying a heavy load, or those with black around their eyes, or wearing blinkers. It was believed that the phobia was linked to the sight of the large genitalia of the animals, and the fear of horses led to little Hans trying to avoid leaving his home in case he encountered one of the animals. In Graf's letter to Freud, he described a preoccupation with the male genitals, which led his wife to threaten his son with calling a doctor to castrate him if it did not end. Max Graf relayed to Freud numerous conversations with his son, which he felt might be of significance to the case. On one occasion, little Hans described two giraffes entering the room that he was in. He imagined one of the giraffes began to crumple, and took it away from the second giraffe, who called out to him. Additionally, sibling jealousy became a problem for little Hans. When he was 3.5 years old, his mother gave birth to a baby sister. The attention of his mother, that his newborn sister deprived him of, led him to feelings of jealousy towards her, and he indicated a wish that she would drown in the bath. Little Hans himself also developed a fear of such misfortune occurring to him. The birth of his sister led little Hans to question the process of conception and childbirth. Unwilling to explain this to their son, his parents provided Hans with the traditional story of a stork delivering babies in boxes. By 1909, Freud's ideas about the Oedipus complex were well established, and Freud interpreted this case in line with his theory. As mentioned, Freud didn't actually work directly with little Hans, but instead worked through correspondence with Hans's father. Again, Hans's father was familiar with Freud's theories and wrote to him when he first suspected that Hans had become a case that Freud might be interested in. Freud suggested possible lines of questioning which the father could try with Hans, and the father tried them and reported to Freud what had taken place. The first reports of Hans are when he was 3 years old, when he developed an active interest in his penis, which he called his whittler, and also the whittlers of other people. For example, on one occasion he asked, "Mummy, have you got a whittler too?" Throughout this time, the main theme of his fantasies and dreams were whittlers and whittling. When Hans was almost 5, Hans's father wrote to Freud explaining his concerns about Hans. Freud wrote a summary of his treatment of little Hans in 1909 in a paper entitled Analysis of a Phobia in a 5-year-old Boy. Since the family of little Hans lived opposite a busy coaching inn, that meant Hans wasn't happy about leaving the house because he saw many horses as soon as he went out the door. When he was first asked about his fear, Hans said that he was frightened that the horses would fall down and make a noise with their feet. He was most frightened of horses which were drawing heavily laden carts, and in fact, as mentioned, he had seen a horse collapse and die in the street one time when he was out with his nurse. This accident was a horse-drawn bus carrying many passengers, and when the horse collapsed, Hans had been frightened by the sound of its hooves clattering against the cobbles of the road. He had also suffered attacks of a more generalized anxiety. Hans's anxieties and phobias continued as he was afraid to go outside of the house because of his phobia of horses. When Hans was taken to see Freud, he was asked about the horses he had a phobia of. Hans noted that he didn't like horses with black bits around the mouth. Freud believed that the horse was a symbol for his father, and the black bits were a moustache. After the interview, the father recorded an exchange with Hans where the boy said, "Daddy, don't trot away from me." Over the next few weeks, Hans's phobia gradually began to improve. Hans said that he was especially afraid of white horses with the black around the mouth who were also wearing blinkers. Hans's father interpreted this as a reference to his moustache and spectacles. After many letters were exchanged, Freud concluded that the boy was afraid that his father would castrate him for desiring his mother, classical Oedipus complex. Freud interpreted that the horses in the phobia were symbolic of his father, and that Hans feared that the horse, i.e., his father, would bite, i.e., castrate him, as punishment for his incestuous desires towards his mother. The end of Hans's phobia of horses was accompanied by two significant fantasies which he told to his father. In the first, Hans had several imaginary children. When asked who their mother was, Hans replied, "Why, Mummy, of course," and, to his father, "You're their granddaddy." In the second fantasy, which occurred the next day, Hans imagined that a plumber had come first to remove his bottom and his whittler, and then gave him another one of each, but both were larger. Freud saw Hans's phobia as an expression of the Oedipus complex. Horses, particularly horses with black harnesses, symbolized his father. Horses were particularly suitable father symbols because of their large penises, according to Freud. The fear began as an Oedipal conflict was developing regarding Hans being allowed in his parents' bed. Hans told his father of a dream fantasy, which his father summarized as follows. In the night there was a big giraffe in the room and a crumpled one, and the big one called out because I took the crumpled one away from it. Then it stopped calling out, and I sat down on top of the crumpled one. Freud and his father interpreted the dream fantasy as being a reworking of the morning exchanges in the parental bed. Hans enjoyed getting into his parents' bed in the morning, but his father offered an objective, the big giraffe calling out because he had taken the crumpled giraffe mother away. Both Freud and his father believed the long neck of the giraffe was a symbol for the large adult penis. However, Hans himself rejected this idea. Freud saw the Oedipus complex resolved as Hans fantasized himself with a big penis like his father's, and married to his mother, with his father present in the role of grandfather. Hans did recover from his phobia after his father, at Freud's suggestion, assured him that he had no intention of cutting off his penis. Freud was attempting to demonstrate that little Hans's fear of horses was related to his Oedipus complex. Freud thought that during the phallic stage, which occurs approximately between 3 and 6 years old, a boy develops an intense sexual love for his mother. Because of this, He sees his father as a rival and wants to get rid of him. The father, however, is far bigger and more powerful than the young boy, and so the child develops a fear, seeing him as a rival, that his father will castrate him. Because it is impossible to live with continual castration threat anxiety provided by this conflict, the young boy develops a mechanism for coping with it, using a defense mechanism known as identification with the aggressor. He stresses all the way that he is similar to his father, adopting his father's attitudes, mannerisms, and actions, feeling that if his father sees him as a similar, he will not feel hostile towards him. So there is some criticism with the interpretation of the case. For instance, the case study of Little Hans does appear to provide support for Freud's theory of the Oedipus complex. However, there are difficulties with this type of evidence. Hans's father, who provided Freud with most of his data, was already familiar with the Oedipus complex and interpreted the case in light of this. It is therefore possible that he supplied Hans with clues that led to his fantasies of marriage to his mother and his new, large Whittler. Of course, even if Hans did have a fully fledged Oedipus complex, this shows that the Oedipus complex exists, but not how common it is. Remember that Freud believed it to be universal. The problem with case studies is that they lack population validity. Because they are often based on one person, it is not possible to generalize the results to a wider population. At the age of 19, the not so little Hans appeared at Freud's consulting room having read his case history. Hans confirmed that he had suffered no troubles during adolescence and that he was fit and well. He could not remember the discussions with his father and described how when he read his case history, it came to him as something unknown. So that is the case of Little Hans and Freud. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you are interested in more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.
All right. Next, let's look at some of the key assumptions in psychodynamic, which are the dominance of unconscious, the importance of early experience, and the psychic determinants. According to Freud in 1915s, the unconscious is the primary source of human behavior. In psychoanalytics theory, the active uh, the activities of mind, also known as psychics, are mainly controlled by the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is the bottom 19th of our eye spots, which cannot be seen, but it is very important in controlling humans' behavior. Second assumptions is the importance of early experience. Based on the psychodynamics theory, the early experience of the individual, especially during his or her childhood year, have a great impact on his or her later life and personality. The third assumption is psychic determinants, which the determinisms refers to the mental process that are based on unconscious. According to Freud, all humans' behaviors and thinking, including random decisions, result from the psychological influences. Based on the three assumptions that states above, we can confirm that psychodynamics theory emphasizes on unconscious mind, early experience, psychics determinisms, and in the developing personalities in the later life. There are many psychologists choose to follow psychodynamics, which are Sigmund Freud was the most famous one, Carl Jung, um, John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth. All of these psychologists discussed in this unit are the key persons in psychodynamic who study how humans functions is influenced by the unconscious mind. So although their concepts may be different from each other's, the core ideas is to towards towards the psychodynamics theory. And according to Sigmund Freud, he's the one who actually introduced topographies models in model in the books, which is the interpretations of dreams that we just mentioned, in which he believed that most of our experience, such as our behavior, our feelings, our belief, are not available at the conscious level. Besides, Sigmund Freud also introduced the structural model, which concedes ego, superego, and ID. In 1905, Sigmund Freud suggested that psychological developments in childhood takes place in a series of psychosexual stage. So in this psychosexual stage, there are 5 stages being stated, which are oral, anal, phalanx, metasis, and genital. So he is the one who also talking about defense mechanism. So in defense mechanism, it refers to the unconscious mind psychological process that prevents an individual from experiencing anxiety that caused by unacceptable thoughts and feelings. These sections cover 8 types of defense mechanisms, which are repressions, the denial, the projections, reactions, formations, rationalizations, uh, regret, replacement, and the supplementations. So in the defense mechanisms, there was first proposed by the Sigmund Freuds and further developed by others, uh, including his own daughter, Hannah Freud. So repression. Repressions refers to the unconscious uh, mechanisms that prevents thoughts become conscious. And the denials involve blocking the external events from awareness, the conscious state, and projections defined it as attributing one's own motive, thoughts, and feelings to another person's. Reactions formations refers to the behaviors of an individual that is opposites to his or her accurate thoughts and feelings. Rationalizations refers to the cognitive distortions um, of the facts to make them less threatening. Displacement refers to a redirections of paddings up feelings towards less than dangerous objects, people, or even animals. In conclusions, defense mechanisms operates at the unconscious levels to reduce the anxiety of an individual. For more details, you may actually refer back to the PDF files in the FlexLens. So next, we are going to look at the video, which is going to further explain about certain topic that's introduced by Sigmund Freud.
The founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, believed the majority of what you experience in life, your emotions, impulses, and memories, are not available on a conscious level. He believed that most of what drives you is buried deep in your unconscious mind and hidden from awareness. Freud believed the human mind has 3 parts: the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. This is called the topographical model. Freud used the analogy of an iceberg to describe this model. The tip depicts the conscious mind. The conscious mind consists of all the mental processes and sensations of which you are aware. For example, you notice you feel hungry and decide to get some food, or you feel cold and decide to put a jacket on. The conscious mind also takes control over all logical and intellectual thought processes. It's all that you are aware of at any given time. The preconscious is just below the level of consciousness. This includes things you don't instantly know, but you can access by association. For example, the smell of freshly baked bread brings back a memory of baking with your grandmother when you were 5 years old. Or listening to a specific song evokes memories of your first holiday abroad. The preconscious is a little bit like a mental waiting room in which memories, thoughts, or feelings remain until they move into conscious awareness. The unconscious mind is depicted by the base of the iceberg. It includes mental processes that are inaccessible or hidden. This might include traumatic events or memories that are too frightening to acknowledge. Most of what goes on in the mind is unconscious, but can still impact your behaviour. Much of what is in the unconscious mind got there via the process of repression. Repression describes a mechanism whereby you push unpleasant or unacceptable feelings, memories, or urges into your unconscious mind. For example, Anna was abused by a parent when she was 3 years old. She has no memory of the abuse, but struggles forming relationships with others. Or we can look at Simon, who was attacked by a stray dog when he was 5. He doesn't remember the incident, but has an intense phobia of dogs. Although both Anna and Simon repressed traumatic childhood events, the symptoms they experience as adults is an expression of their traumas. Repression is a defense mechanism, and a defense mechanism is a behavior used to separate yourself from unpleasant events, actions, or thoughts. According to Freud, much of what happened to you as a child is still present in your unconscious mind and is therefore capable of exerting great influence over you as an adult. Since most people are incapable of recalling the details of their childhood, the focus of therapy is to look more closely at the past with the view of uncovering significant and meaningful memories. The idea here is that by understanding the connections between past and present, a new perspective can be gained. So what are your thoughts about the topographical model? I'd love to hear from you. And if you found this video interesting, please give it a thumbs up. You may also be interested in the video on the screen now, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Sigmund Freud is one of the most famous names in psychology. Even though most of his ideas have been abandoned by modern psychology, his psychoanalytic theory formed the basis for many current psychodynamic theories. Freud was the first to discuss the unconscious mind and its role in human behavior. Freud believed that there were 3 levels of consciousness. First is the unconscious mind, which exists outside of your awareness at all times. Next is the preconscious mind, which includes all information that you're not currently aware of, but that can be recalled. Finally, the conscious mind is your current state of awareness. Remember the cartoons you used to watch as a child? The main character is confronted with a choice. On his left shoulder is a little devil pushing him toward a bad choice. On his right shoulder, a little angel is encouraging him to make a good choice. He is stuck in the middle and forced to make a decision that will affect him. This scenario is much like Freud's theory of personality. There are 3 parts to personality according to Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory. These are the id, superego, and ego. The id is the first to develop, the ego is second, and the superego is the last to develop. The id is the biological component of the personality and includes your instincts. The id operates in our unconscious mind. It is like the little devil sitting on the cartoon character's shoulder that's always selfish and needy. It operates according to the pleasure principle. The pleasure principle is the idea that all of your needs should be met immediately. Then there's the superego. The superego exists in all three levels of consciousness. The superego is like the little angel. It is always concerned with what is socially acceptable. The superego pushes you to obtain the ego ideal, or your view of what is right. It also represents your conscience, or your view of what is considered to be wrong. Finally, we have the ego. The ego operates in your preconscious and conscious mind. The ego is part of the personality that makes your decisions. This is like the cartoon character in the example. The ego is in the middle, makes the decision, and faces the consequences. The ego operates according to the reality principle. The reality principle is the idea that the desires of the id must.
We'll be looking at Carl Jung's theory. So the sites refers to the conscious and unconscious awareness. Jung stated that human sight can be divided into conscious mind and unconscious level. His theory stated that human sight is made up of three components, which are ego, personal unconscious, and collective unconscious. So, according to Jung in 1963, personalities can be divided into two attitude types, introverts and extroverts. Jung further divided these two attitudes as introverts and extroverts into four functions, which are thinking, feeling, sensation, and institution. Each of these attitudes can be matched to any of these functions. So there are eight possible type of personality. We can briefly discuss four function as follow: thinking, referring to um, applying reasonings to the situations and individual encounter. An individual can understand the meaning of the situation. For example, we will attempt to think of all the consequences before we make a decision. Feelings referring to the subjective assessments when remaining in the environments or situations. Feelings enables an individuals to understand the value of conscious activity. We will continue the activities if it brings us a good feelings. Sensations referring to the feelings or perceptions when encountering the situations. In other words, an individual can sense the situations and know something exists. Institutions referring to the abilities to understand an individual experience without conscious reasoning. In another words, institutions is known as something existing but without consciously sourcing the knowledge. So Jung also identified many archetypes, but only focus on four archetypes, which are persona, aminar, shadow, sorry, and the self. So the personas refers to a mask, outward face that's presented to the world. In other words, this is the public face presented to others, which totally different from who we are. It helps to screen our real self from the outside world. So it is also been called as a packagings of the ego. The aminars refers to the mirror image of our biological um, sex, and in another words, there are unconscious feminine characteristics in male and unconscious masculine characters in females. In the context, the masculine characters refers to the autonomy, aggressiveness, and feminines referring to the characteristics, uh, referring to the empathies and nurtures. Shadows referring to animal sides of the individual personality. It is also similar with the ID in Freud's theory. So the shadows actually are responsible for the appearance of consciousness and behavior of unpleasant or socially prohibited thoughts and feelings. The shadow is the source of both creative and destructive energy. The self in this context referring to the unities in all sense of experience. In other words, the self is the whole of psyches, which includes the human's full potential. The self is also intersections of collective conscious, unconscious, and conscious mind. So the main purpose of self is to bring out the full potentials of an individual. It is responsible for the full potentials of an individual in every stage of life if it's allowed the situations. Next, let's watch another videos to know more about Jung's theory.
Jung's theory of personality. It must be noted from the outset that Carl Jung was considered Sigmund Freud's protégé. In fact, Freud saw the young Jung to be his heir, who will continue promoting his new science of psychoanalysis. Indeed, Jung was an early supporter of Freud's psychoanalysis. Jung even became president of the International Psychoanalytical Association at the request of Freud. However, during his 1912 lecture tour in the United States, Jung publicly criticized Freud's theory of the Oedipus complex and his emphasis on infantile sexuality, which resulted in a split between them. In fact, most of the assumptions in Jung's model of analytical psychology reflect his theoretical differences with Freud. Jung then went on to develop his own version of psychoanalytical theory and establish his own analytical psychology as a comprehensive system separate from Freud's psychoanalysis. Freud versus Jung. Let me briefly sketch the main differences between Freud and Jung's theory of personality before I discuss Jung's theory of personality. On the one hand, Freud focuses more on the unconscious mind and its direct connection to one's suppressed thoughts and primal human drives, such as sex, violence, and aggression. For Freud, therefore, the unconscious is a storehouse of unacceptable repressed desires specific to the individual. It is also important to note that the human psyche for Freud is divided into three components, namely, the id, the ego, and the superego. According to Freud, the id is connected to our unconscious drives, the ego is linked to our conscious experiences, and the superego mediates our behavior by balancing the impulses of the id and the ego. For a detailed discussion on Freud's model of psychoanalysis, please see our video lecture on Freud's 5 stages of psychosexual development. See description below for the link. On the other hand, Jung acknowledges Freud's notion of the unconscious mind, but focuses more on the individual's lived experiences and future aspirations. Hence, contra Freud, Jung views the unconscious mind as a storehouse of repressed memories specific to the individual and her ancestral past. Indeed, Jung departs from Freud by conceptualizing the idea of a collective consciousness. In fact, among the central concepts of Jung's model of psychoanalysis or psychoanalytical theory is individuation, that is, the lifelong psychological process of differentiation of the self out of each individual's conscious and unconscious elements. This explains why Jung developed the important concepts of collective unconscious, synchronicity, introversion, extroversion, archetypal phenomena, and psychological complex. Jung's theory of personality. Let me now briefly sketch the key concepts of Jung's theory of personality. Structure of the mind. Jung's view of the structural nature of personality clearly reflected a redefined, expanded view of the unconscious mind. The conscious ego is the center of conscious awareness of the self. The major functions of the conscious ego are to make the individual aware of his or her internal processes, for example, thoughts or feelings of pain, and the external world, for example, surrounding noises, through sensations and perceptions at a level of awareness necessary for day-to-day functioning. For example, a motorist recalls the alternate route for driving into town due to traffic problems ahead. Directly next to the conscious ego, and completely below conscious awareness, Jung proposed the personal unconscious region of the mind. The contents of the personal unconscious included all those thoughts, memories, and experiences that were momentarily not being thought about and or repressed because they were too emotionally threatening. Important elements in the personal unconscious are what Jung described as complexes. For Jung, a complex is a collection of thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and memories that center around a particular concept. The more elements attached to the complex, the greater its influence on the individual. For example, complexes associated with religion and politics oftentimes tend to have a rather strong influence on the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of individuals committed to a particular ideology. The influence of the personal unconscious also includes a prospective and compensatory function. The prospective function served to help the individual look into the future, for example, aspirational thinking and setting of goals. According to Jung, the compensatory function of the personal unconscious helps individuals to balance out at an unconscious level the conscious aspects of personality being ignored. For example, a shy person may dream of being the life of the party. While the personal unconscious is unique to each individual, the collective unconscious is conceptualized as being transpersonal in nature. The transpersonal nature of the collective unconscious reflected Jung's view that there is a region of the unconscious mind containing a collection of general wisdom that is shared by all people, has developed over time, and is passed along from generation to generation across the ages and locations around the world. Contained in the collective unconscious was a universal set of common thoughts, feelings, behaviors, beliefs, rituals, emotions, experiences, images, and symbols inherited from all of those who ever came before us over time, including animals. The principal function of this collective wisdom is to predispose individuals to respond to certain external situations in a given manner to maximize the development of the individual, for example, fear of the unknown, search for novelty, desire for social order, and need for the emotional contact with others. Thus, because these predispositions, or hereditary wisdom, are passed along from generation to generation, individuals do not need to start all over again with each new generation, making the task of survival that much easier. Jung believed all of this inherited universal knowledge was stored in the collective unconscious in the form of archetypes. Archetypes were universal thought patterns and behavior rituals triggered by specific situations and symbols and images representing certain people, ideas, or beliefs. When expressed, these archetypes provide a universal response proven to be adaptive over time and across situations. For example, when groups of humans or animals gather, there seems to be an archetype for creating social order, whether that order is based on strength, knowledge, or ability, and an archetype for language, whether that language is based on bark, words, hand gestures, or music. Over time and across situations, there seems to be archetypes for believing in a higher power, for example, the sun god, Christ, Buddha, Allah, the stars, to give people hope. There are many different representations of the image for a mother archetype, for example, the Virgin Mary, the Queen Mother, Mother Nature, which create a sense of caring and comfort. In addition to these general archetypes, Jung proposed very specific archetypes representing core elements of personality. To facilitate the interaction of the sexes, the animus is the masculine side of females and the amina is the feminine side of males. The persona was the tendency for people to develop a certain pattern of behaviors when in public to get along with others, similar to Freud's superego. The shadow represents the dark and more primitive side of personality, similar to Freud's id. The self, the most important archetype, serves to unite all other aspects of the individual's personality, similar to Freud's ego. The dynamics of personality. Jung viewed psychic energy as a generalized motivational source designed to help the self achieve a sense of balance. The self achieves a sense of balance within the personality by the ebb and flow of psychic energy among the various aspects of the self according to three basic principles. According to the principle of opposites, for each conscious and/or unconscious reaction within the personality, there is an opposite reaction to it somewhere else within the system, for example, offset the development of an analytical side of personality at work with the seeking of more creative pursuits during times of leisure. According to the principle of equivalence, any psychic energy taken from one psychic structure, for example, devotion to friends, is found somewhere else in the system, for example, cramming for an exam. On the other hand, the principle of entropy states that when one aspect of the personality has a greater amount of psychic energy, for example, cramming for an exam, the energy will flow back to the weaker aspect to create a sense of balance, for example, spend extra time with friends after the exam. Personality assessment. In a word association test, the individual is given a word and asked to report the first word that comes to mind. Jung was the first individual to employ systematically the use of the word association test in the clinical setting. His principal purpose was to use it to help identify the client's problematic complexes. More specifically, by examining what words produced various types of nervous behavior, for example, stammering and/or changes in respiration rate, in the client, as well as the associations themselves, Jung was able to assess the degree of emotionality of the word associations and uncover their attachment to problematic complexes. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, is based on Jung's type theory concerning differences in the way individuals use perception and judgment as general orientations to their experiences. More specifically, the MBTI illustrates some of the basic differences in the ways human beings take in information and make decisions. According to Jung, there are two general types of personality attitudes by which individuals orient themselves toward their environment, namely, extroversion and introversion. The extroversion attitude is an outward orientation in which psychic energy is invested in events and objects in the external environment, for example, prefers group activities. The introverted attitude reflects an inward orientation in which psychic energy is invested in internal and more personal experiences, for example, prefers to spend time alone. While Jung believed that both types of attitudes are present within each personality, he also thought that in each person one attitude is expressed more at the conscious level than the other. Besides the two basic attitudes of personality, Jung also proposed the existence of four functions of personality, namely, 1. The sensation function, 2. The thinking function, 3. The feeling function. And 4. The intuition function. Each function is characterized by a specific orientation for understanding the events and experiences in the environment. The sensation function involves relating to the world through the senses. For example, to know something, one must be able to hear, smell, see, or feel it. The thinking function refers to the tendency to relate to the world through ideas and intellect. For example, if something is out there, what is its relation to other things? The feeling function concerns reacting to the world based on the affective quality of one's experiences with it. For example, is that something good, valuable, acceptable, harmful, or unpleasant? The intuition function goes beyond all of the other conscious functions and relies on a deeper, more internal sense of understanding. For example, although knowing what something is and how it feels, it still does not seem quite right for some strange reason. As with the two attitude types, Jung assumed that each personality possesses all four functions, but one is often expressed at a more conscious level and predominant at the expense of the others. Thus, while a feeling type person will have to see it to believe it, an intuitive type person will know by just having a gut feeling about it.
So after we knowing about the Jung and Freud's theory, it's quite important for us to differentiate what is the differences between these two theory. So the differences are concepts of libido, concept of unconscious, and cause of behavior. Under the concept of libidos, Freud stated that sexual gratifications at different psychosexual stage, while Jung stated that psychic energies that motivates peoples. Freud also mentions unconscious mind is unaccepted, repressed thoughts and defense mechanisms. And Jones believed that unconscious mind is collective unconscious. Besides that, he claimed that childhood experience affects humans' functioning, and Jung thinks past experience will contribute to the future's aspirations. And next, we are going to look at the stage of attachments, which is introduced by John Bouvain. So he's the one who divided attachments into four stages, which are pre-attachments, attachments in making, clear-cut attachment, and formations reciprocate. We will discuss this stage by describing the behaviors of the infantile, the babies, and the caregiver. So pre-attached usually is from 0 to 6 week, where during this stage, the attachments have not been formed between the baby and the primary caregiver. So, however, the baby will be able to recognize the primary caregiver, and in this stage, the baby can only perform limited behavior to attract the adult caregiver, such as eye contact, smiling, um, maybe crying, to asking for help or satisfies their needs for it. And the baby will also calm down simply by the presence of people. And next, from 6 weeks to 8 months, usually is the where the attachments is making. So in this stage, infantiles will be actually um, start to build trust towards the caregiver. If its constant needs to be fulfilled, and Due to the trust, the baby will smile frequently and smoothed by the primary giver. In other words, the baby will prefers primary caregivers to others. And in this stage, the attachments has been established between the baby and the primary caregiver. This means that the baby will prefer to stay with the primary caregiver than with other people. So when the primary caregiver leave, the baby will experience the will experience the separation anxiety. So the extent of separations anxieties will depend on the baby temperaments and response from the caregiver. So in the last stage, which is 18 months and throughout the life, is where they're having the formations of reciprocity relationships. So uh, in the stage, the separations anxiety is reducing. The children's or the child will actually understands the language spoken by the primary caregiver, and besides that, a sense of securities has been formed through which the child will understand that the primary caregiver will always be there for him or her, even though he or him is not around all the time. So the turtle will develop the attachments to people other than the primary caregivers as they grew up. And throughout this stage, we will slowly see the attachment slowly develops and expand to other peoples as the baby grew up. So the next sections will discuss the types of attachments proposed by the we are going to look at the videos.
John Bowlby's decades of work into parent-child attachment has led to a huge body of research into bonds and relationships. Now, an attachment can be described as a long-enduring emotional tie to a specific person, and according to Bowlby, such bonds are rooted in evolutionary development. Now, babies have an innate drive to form an attachment with a primary caregiver. It's pretty sharpish, and that's so they can guarantee someone a little bit bigger and a lot bit stronger is there for them to protect them from danger. Now, Bowlby suggests that there are 5 key innate behaviours that babies have in their arsenal straight out of the belly to secure them this satisfactorily whipped primary caregiver. Now, if you watched last time's video, you'll know that these behaviours are sucking, cuddling, looking, smiling, and crying. SCLSC. So how does an attachment develop? Well, Bowlby identifies 4 stages. The first phase, called pre-attachment, covers the first 2 months from birth. In this time, babies already show a portfolio of interaction and attachment-seeking behaviours, even without any personal social experience. They truly are natural people pleasers. In this phase, babies demonstrate a marked preference for a human over a non-human stimuli. For example, a child of this age is much more likely to want to look at a face than at a beach ball. And straight away, they're able to exhibit these signalling behaviours, such as smiling and crying, to attach and maintain attention. Well, in the second stage, attachment in the making, it's the precursor to full-on genuine attachment. From 2 to 7 months, babies acquire the basic social rules of interacting with others, such as turn-taking and shared attention. At this stage of development, the primary caregiver is doing a huge amount of the legwork on behalf of the infant, teaching them the basic rules of play, of turn-taking and demonstrating interaction through things like baby talk conversation and playing with the baby. Bowlby's third stage is what he calls clear-cut attachment, emerging between 7 months and 2 years. Now, this stage loosely lines up with Bowlby's concept of a critical period of attachment, though this idea is somewhat out of fashion at the moment, which we're going to talk about in next time's video. By this stage, infants show undeniable indications of having formed a specific attachment. For example, it's at this point that a baby demonstrates the ability to miss their primary caregiver and doesn't treat all adults indiscriminately. It's no longer squishy baby cuddles for all, it's specific love for a specific person. The final of Bowlby's 4 stages is a goal-corrected partnership. And it's at this stage that the infant's behaviours from 2 years become increasingly intentional. A younger infant would cry because they're in pain, whereas an infant at this stage of development would cry in order to summon their primary caregiver. And this is a hugely sophisticated form of social interaction. Not only are they responding to their own needs and goals, but they're able to manipulate those of others by calculating primary caregivers' own personal goals into their decision making and behavior. And it shows that the infant has now developed the basics of a relationship. As these skills develop, a child can move beyond the initial use of external behaviors and draw on increasingly complex understandings of internal feelings and expectations. And it's at this point that Bowlby's concept of internal working models really comes into force. And the basis of all future relationships and interactions are built on these foundational interactions with a person's primary caregiver. Thank you for watching this one. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up to let other people know that it's a good one to watch to revise for this topic. And as always, I will see you next time for more exam-busting videos all about psychology.
For more information, you can always log into our FlexLearns learning materials or even some of the PDF textbook where you can get more information and deeper insight knowledge. Thank you.